Hikers of Reddit, what's the weirdest / scariest thing you've found / seen during a hike? Mountain lion came very close to me. It didn't seem aggressive, but it was curious. After a few minutes of us staring at each other and me pissing my pants, he finally lost interest and disappeared into the forest while I got the fuck out of there. Hiking early morning in Hawaii and my stomach notifies me that it's time to go number 2. I find a porta potty near the trailhead and jump in to do my business. Once complete, I flipped my headlamp on to find the toilet paper, but instead find a huge, 5 in diameter, banana spider hanging out in the corner of the porta potty. Trying not to spook it, I slowly reached for the 1-ply. As I do, my headlamp shines on this monster and it proceeds to freak TF out. It runs in circles for a bit, both of us losing our minds at this point, and ends up between my legs inside of my underwear. I'm at a complete loss for what to do, but eventually begin wiggling back and forth in an attempt to get this spider to remove itself. That didn't work at all. Instead of exiting the premises, this emperor runs up my leg. This is the point where I give up and storm out of the porta potty yelling and screaming, pants around my ankles. No clue what happened to that spider, but it disappeared in a flash, just like my dignity. I watched a doe give birth once. I stumbled on a poaching dump when I was 14. I used to hike trails near our home, way out in the woods. I'd explore, and then have to find my way back without a compass. I went really far one day, probably 2 to 3 miles through these old logging trails. I started smelling something terrible. There was a rocky outcrop right before a steep cliff. At the bottom of the cliff, there was a massive pile of dead deer. Most were decapitated. Some were fawns. Had to have been 20 to 30 of them at varying states of decay. The stench was mind-alteringly bad. When I thought I had seen enough, I heard 4-wheelers and decided to hide. 2 poachers in camo rolled up and tossed 2 more deer carcasses on the pile. They smoked, talked, and then left after about 10 minutes. I was probably 15 feet from them the entire time, hiding under a hemlock tree. I did not recognize either of them, and I knew absolutely everyone on that entire side of town. It was only 15 to 20 houses in a 5-mile stretch. I ran home and told my parents. They didn't believe me. Plus, they didn't know I was running off to those trails, so I got in huge trouble for that. I mentioned it to our neighbor who was big into hunting. He seemed very concerned and brought it up to the game warden. They investigated it, found the dump site, but never caught anybody. I am 100% certain it was not my neighbor. Hiking in Alaska, I once found myself 50 yards from a grizzly bear and her cub. But weirdly, I wasn't worried as we were at a creekside that was having a heavy salmon run and she was way more interested in the fish than me. I just took some pictures and then backed away slowly. What actually did scare the shit out of me was the time I was hiking near Homer AK on what felt like an almost suburban bike path. A moose and her calf walked out of the woods in front of me. Moose are so huge they are not like deer at all. I was inside of my car, but she was between me and it. I was hoping she would continue walking, but she decided to stop and eat some of the tall shrubbery along the edge of the path, all the while staring at me. It felt like hours that I stood there frozen until she eventually moved on, but in reality, it was probably only a few minutes. I could vaguely hear some kind of instrument being played. The closer I got, I could make out it was a saxophone. This dude was walking the trail through the woods while playing a fucking sax. I passed him and he said, "Beautiful day for music." Thought I wandered into a Twin Peaks episode. This 6 cotton mouth that almost bit a fellow hiker. I think about 5 of us went from 100 BPM to 150 BPM when it struck. Thankfully it missed him. Took us a while to chase it off. It was huge. https://iMager.com/g5pi068.jpg. In the middle of nowhere, written in the snow, were the words, "Per audacia ad ignotum," although there were no footprints nearby. They had probably been spoken for a few hours. "Through audacity towards the unknown" was the most accurate translation we could discover. I've seen mountain lions, I've seen bears. The scariest thing I've seen was an elaborate grow operation in northern CA. I crested a hill and walked 20 yards into this valley when I realized there were irrigated pot plants for as far as the eye could see. Reservoirs, hoses, camouflaged netting. My friend and I noped out of there as fast we could, both expecting to be shot on our way back to our car. Late 90s, I was in my junior year of high school and hiking up Usery Mountain in East Mesa, Arizona with my best bud and 2 girls we liked. We reached the wind cave at the top, but wanted to keep going, so we scrambled up to the summit to take in the view. My friend was sitting on a rock and noticed an old rusty Altoids tin box and picked it up. Inside were 2 folded up pieces of white paper which he spread out on the rock. The first page was a crude sketch of the view from that exact spot drawn in pencil with the caption, "The last view from name SIs," with the date. I believe it was only some months or a year past. The second page was an apology letter listing people in this person's life and things they were sorry to have said or did to them. We surmised that it was a suicide note and started searching the backside of Usery for anything. Something. Remains, clothes, more clues. Nothing. This was the late 90s and internet search was not really a thing yet, so we went to the Central Mesa Library to sort through the microfiche files, skimming through newspapers a little after the date on the drawing for any lost person notices or any news related, and again nothing, but it was fun feeling like I was Encyclopedia Brown for an afternoon. Some years later my friend moved to another part of the US and hasn't really kept in touch, but I often wonder if he still has the tin and if he ever found the person's identity using modern research methods. Unsatisfying end to the story, I know, but it was definitely a little creepy and a little sad. Plus I got to use the word microfisk. East Mesa has a surprising amount of culty aspects that I experienced growing up. I should probably write them all down. Just a couple weeks ago, I had the honor of staring down the angry eyes of a bison charging at me. He stopped when I yelled at him in a strong assertive voice, but holy shit. It made me realize just how helpless I was miles away from any other people. On a backpacking trip in the Sierra Mountains in California, my buddy forgot to put his toothpaste in the bear bag, which is a bag you put all food and aromatic items in to hang from a tree branch at night so the bears won't eat it. At about 2 a.m., we hear him yelling and get up to find a huge black bear on top of him in his tent trying to get at the toothpaste. The rest of us had to bang pans and throw rocks to get the bear to leave him alone. Hundreds of dolls hanging from a tree in different styles of torture. Some group of people were walking down from a summit up to 13k foot and chatted in passing for a moment when a guy was like, "Oh, and if you find my phone that I dropped," sarcastically like we're going to find his phone. No shit, I almost stepped on it. On a green hillside, it was face down in a green case. Definition of needle in a haystack. Crazy. I was on a hike with my Boy Scout troop and my friend and I went off the trail a little bit and we found a person hanging in a tree, one of the most traumatic things I have ever seen. I have been hiking and backpacking for 25 years and have seen bears, mountain lion prints, etc., but honestly the scariest thing has always been other people. Not people I think are going to attack me. People I think are going to die, heh. The number of people I see miles from the trailhead with just a t-shirt and shorts and nothing else, nothing in their hands, no bag. No water, no food, no hat, no extra layers, compass, rain gear, etc. The worst was when I was 6 miles into a backpacking trip. It was nearly dark, I'd be hiking a couple hours in darkness before I made camp, and this guy with nothing but shorts and a t-shirt passed me headed in the other direction. He was going to be in pitch black soon, with no headlamp, or jacket, or food. He looked really stressed out. Walking down the path we heard some rustling. On one side of the path was a young bear and on the other was a big bear, presumably mama. There was a makeshift bridge up ahead about 50 yards so we very quietly walked up and got across that. Baby crossed the path right where I had been and rejoined mama and they walked off. In the 1970s my then best friend and I went to the same summer day camp. Once a week they'd drive us to a state park for the day. They'd arrange games, baseball, soccer, etc., for us to play to keep us kids occupied. My friend and I hated sports and preferred not to play. We'd rather take solitary hikes in the woods and explore. We weren't allowed to go off alone without counselors, so we never asked permission. One time we came across a milk crate filled with cartons of milk. Right in the middle of the woods. Far from any place that would need it. They weren't even expired, old, or spoiled. It was good, fresh milk. Why would anyone deposit a single crate filled with cartons of fresh milk out in the middle of nowhere? Mutilated deer in a garbage bag next to a mattress in a shack in the middle of nowhere. Probably under 24 hours old. My wife and I were on our honeymoon. We were on an island in Thailand, and about 2 hours into a jungle hike. In the middle of nowhere, we hear bloody curdling screams of desperation. My first thoughts were someone had fallen and broken their leg or something and we need to help them. Eventually, we get to this person who was in hysterics after being lost in this jungle for almost a full day. It turned out he lives less than a mile from us back in the UK and works for my best friend.